Because cycling makes us happy, there's actually very little for cyclists to complain about, other than roadworks, traffic, cost, Zwift subscription increases, Rafa's new collection, and potholes. As a result, we like to debate complex subjects like what is bikepacking, what is cycle touring, and are they just the same? Bikepacking or cycle touring? That is the question. And this oft-quoted Shakespeare puzzle is exactly what we're going to discuss today, and I, for one, am excited. First, let's talk semantics. Here's what Google Trends has got to say about the usage of the term bikepacking from 2005 to 2024. And here is the line for cycle touring, and here is the graph of them together. I'm sure you're seeing a pattern. The term bikepacking has seemingly come from nowhere in the last 20 years, leading a lot of people to think it's a completely new term, and it kind of is when you think about it in popular usage, but the concept isn't new at all. In fact, people have been strapping stuff to their bikes for decades, for 100 years. Sometimes it's inline and sometimes it sticks out, but it all comes under the umbrella of strapping stuff to your bike. Second, implications. The main difference between bikepacking and cycle touring in sort of popular ideas is about the surface that you're going to be riding on, because that surface changes the type of luggage that you'll probably be carrying. Cycle touring often means sticking to road-like surfaces, so roads, bike paths, hard-packed gravel, cycleways, things like that. Surfaces that you wouldn't want to take a road bike on necessarily, but you also don't need your tyres to be particularly knobbly. Touring bikes and gravel bikes are perfect for this kind of cycling because you are going to end up off-road at some point. But because you're mainly on wider trails like roads, lanes, bridleways, back alleys, I don't know, it's a lot easier to have wider luggage, so panniers, pannier racks, things like that, because you're in wider spaces. And if you're carrying panniers, that means you can also carry tents and, in fact, everything, excluding the kitchen sink. Which is why I see a lot of cycle tourists carrying literally all of their possessions, sometimes around the world. Bikepacking, on the other hand, has a more off-road bent to it. You might find people riding bikepacking routes that are entirely off-road, but mainly gravel rather than anything you'd actually need a mountain bike for. Still, some long-distance bikepacking routes are still going to have bits of single track on them and other fun stuff that makes it a little bit cooler than cycle touring. And for that reason, it's much more sensible to carry your luggage, the stuff you strap to your bike, in line with your body and your frame, because otherwise it's going to get caught on brambles, rocks, and other off-roady kind of related things. This also means that bikepacking, you typically can't carry as much stuff as you can when you're cycle touring, because you can't have things outside of the line of your bike, which to me seems like when you're bikepacking, you're much less likely to be carrying a lot of camping related equipment. Third, accommodation. Everyone seems to have a very different opinion on what typical accommodation is for cycle tourers versus bikepackers, or bikepackers versus cycle tourers. For me personally, I consider myself always to really have cycle toured with panniers and things like that, and every time I've cycle toured, more or less, I've stayed in campsites. So I've always camped, I've carried my tent with me and things like that. Whereas when I've bike packed, I've always stayed in hotels and B&Bs. But I've also spoken to people who assumed it was kind of vice versa, so they just assumed that cycle tourers would always stay in hotels and B&Bs and bikepackers would always camp or bivvy. So I think it's less to do with the bike you have and the kind of riding you're doing, and more about just the accommodation that you fancy staying in. Which is a good thing, because if we started adding accommodation rules into this what is bikepacking, what is cycle touring, then those words would be doing a lot of heavy lifting for a lot of contexts. There's also the added complexity that cycle tourers are definitely going to end up off-road at some point on their routes, and bikepackers are almost certainly going to end up on roads for some parts of their routes. So what are we to say? From my perspective, and this is coming from a professional writer who works in this very industry writing, the extent to which I care which term is used is to ensure that what I'm writing and what I'm saying is as clear as possible to the audience. So I'll usually use the word that makes the situation I'm talking about most clear. When it comes to things like YouTube, you'll see that I will include cycle touring and bikepacking usually in my titles and descriptions if I'm talking about overnight cycling, so multi-day cycling, because so many people use these terms interchangeably or in slightly different ways or in the opposite ways to other people. So it's good to mop up those people who might be searching for one word where I or someone else might use the other word. You can find a lot of opinions on the internet about what bikepacking is exactly and what cycle touring is exactly, but I think these things miss the point a little bit in that A, does it matter? And B, what kind of solution are we really trying to get to here? After all, if you're hashtag van lifing, you're still going to say, I'm driving to the beach. And you're still going to say that if you're in a Vauxhall Corsa. Is a Corsa a Vauxhall? Is a Vauxhall a Corsa? You know what I mean. At the end of the day, you're just going on a multi-day bike ride. And finally, let's put this in some real perspective. English is just one language. We do not own the entire world. These are just terms in English. That's all they are. When it comes to other languages, most of them won't be differentiating between these two types of cycling whatsoever. I'm sure there's a language out there, probably German, that just translates this term as strapping lots of things onto your bike and going for a ride that lasts for more than one day. And at the end of the day, like, using one word or phrase can never capture the nuance of an adventure, of a multi-day ride. Whether it's bikepacking or cycle touring, still those phrases, we're asking them to do too much work. What is bikepacking to one person is different to another, and what's bikepacking or cycle touring in one country is going to be different from another country, not even from language, but just from terrain, from temperature, from environment, from conditions. Like, it's all very, very different. And the more we get hung up on individual words and phrases, the more we lose sight of what these things actually are, which are just fun. Right? They're fun. They're just things to do. So if you see me use bikepacking and or cycle touring interchangeably, it's not because I don't think there's a difference necessarily. It's because I don't think that difference matters enough for me to care. And if you really want to go bikepacking or cycle touring and you haven't yet, and you're worried about going into a shop or whatever, or going online, you don't know what to search, which terms you use, am I going bikepacking, am I going cycle touring? Hey, don't worry about it, it's fine. The only thing that you need to do to definitely be a bikepacker and or a cycle tourist is to always have snacks with you. Always, like always. If you're not carrying snacks in your pocket, stashed somewhere at inappropriate points on your bike, then you can't call yourself either of those terms. I'm sorry, it's just true. Don't hate the messenger. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.